Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to day 8 of the Liyab Learning Challenge. So I'd like to first thank you guys for participating in the challenge ever since day one. I've noticed that some of you have been submitting your assignments already in the different threads, and I really appreciate that. I love seeing the different ideas that you guys came up with. I love the responses to like the day one homework, for example. And then the different ways that you came up with how you plan to expand your network. Really like the responses to that one as well. So I hope you keep them coming, because even though the Liab Learning Challenge happens live for 10 days, we're gonna keep all the videos up and all the resources up in the group. So if, like, for example, this is your first day of tuning in, you can always go back, watch the previous videos, and participate if you want some sort of certificate, or even if you just want to learn the skill tackled in that specific video. So really appreciate the ones who have stuck with us from day one. And so I guess some of you may have noticed that in up the past couple of days, we've had some sort of progression. For example, from talking about this, choosing the best idea from Cindy's learning session, and then yesterday we talked about brainstorming. So we thought a nice way to follow up those two talks on ideas would be on actual execution, how to make things happen. And for today's session, we've invited Colleen Faye Toledo from Unionbank. She's actually a customer experience designer there, but part of her job as customer experience designer is actually making things happen, getting things done. And so a crucial skill to make things happen is really knowing like what project management is, and applying those. I believe in one of my previous discussions before with Colleen, she's actually taken a course, a short course on project management before. Maybe she can give us a bit of an idea about that. But I think I've seen her slides, and I think she'll be introducing a lot of like concepts, especially some of them like in the technology world, are project management, for example, concepts that we've been we've been tackling in the tech world, in the tech scene, in the past couple of years lately. And I think it ties really nicely with design thinking, which is a topic we've also been discussing throughout the learning challenge. All right. So as usual, what's gonna happen here is that I will be providing you with Colleen. Colleen will be going through her own session. She'll discuss the homework, and then after, I'll be back to answer questions to her. So at any point, if you guys have any questions for her, please comment them on the live video. All right, and then we'll be reading them at the end. Okay. So if you guys are ready, I'm ready to learn from Colleen. Colleen, take it away.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and thank you so much for inviting me also to this session. So I'm curious if you guys can hear me. Is it good? All right, cool. So yeah, this afternoon I'm here to give you a crash course on project management, or just simply how to make things happen. But this is in no way a preparation for a certification exam if you guys are interested in that. But yes, there are multiple certification exams for specifically for project managers for various frameworks. But what I'll be sharing with you for this afternoon are actually practical tips on how to turn an idea into reality. So before we start, I'll introduce myself formally. So I'm Colleen. I'm a CX designer from Unionbank. I graduated from UP Diliman with a degree in mathematics, and I have worked in the banking industry for almost 8 years now. And I actually started as a risk analyst from a multinational bank. And then I moved to Union Bank and started as a management trainee. And then eventually found my niche in leading projects and in making things happen. So to formally begin, I'd like to start with the definition of a project. So according to the Project Management Institute, a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So note that the definition says it should be a temporary endeavor, meaning it has to have a start and an end. So it's pretty much like life in general too, because life has a start and an end. Therefore, you can technically apply some of the project management principles to your life. And then, interestingly enough, there are actually TED Talks about that on how to apply PMP skills to your life. And so now that we have that out of the way, we'll now talk about project managers. So who are project managers? They are actually agents of change in the organization. So they are the ones who really drive the team and inspire a sense of shared purpose towards reaching a common goal. And they should be very comfortable with complexity because projects are unique. And the PMs must be able to paint a big picture for the project for stakeholders, but be also be able to zoom in to small but critical details. And most importantly, the PM must be able to know when to concentrate on each. And lastly, but most importantly, our PMs or project managers need to have great people skills. So actually we talk about this with my friends in the back is that the acronym PM actually translate to people manager. So when you manage people, you eventually manage the project itself. But that's mainly because it's a skill that is needed to develop trust and communication among all your project stakeholders. But it does not mean that you have to be an extrovert. I, for one, am an introvert, but having good people skills just mean that you should be able to care personally to the people in the project team or to empathize. And I think that's one of the first topics here in the Liyab Learning Challenge. If I'm not mistaken, that's the very first one, actually, just a week ago. But yeah, so for today, I'll be discussing two frameworks of project management, and I'll try not to get very technical about it, but the first one is actually the traditional framework, or also known as a waterfall framework in the IT industry. So it follows a linear sequential project life cycle. So just like in the picture, it's really like the waterfall where the activities will not begin until the previous one has ended. So in this example, this is actually a software development life cycle where the first phase is locking down the requirements. So once you discuss and you sign off on the requirements, then that's the only time that you can proceed to the design stage. And in the design of the solution, you also have to agree and to sign that off before you go and build and then eventually test. And once everything is done, that's the only time that you can deploy your product to production for customer use. So later on, I will discuss the advantages and limitations of this framework. So this traditional framework actually has a certification exam from the Project Management Institute, or PMI, which I'm a proud member of, and also a certified project management professional. So if you guys are interested in knowing more about that, just feel free to contact me later on. And so the next one is the Agile project management, which is a continuous and iterative development and testing process. So as you can see in the picture, it's really different from the waterfall one, where it's more of a ladder kind of approach. Here, it's represented by a wheel, which means the framework allows you to always go back and refine on the things that you have already done. So just like the traditional one, I will also be discussing pros and cons to this later on. Okay, so for the traditional project management or waterfall, so the advantages of it is actually it's the best framework for simple to less complex projects. Meaning if you're tasked to deliver a project where your customer knows exactly what they want, then this is the best framework to follow because this also requires a lot of documentation and sign offs as part of the project deliverables. So it's kind of matrabaho for the PMs, but it's also very beneficial later on when you go over the results of the project. It's also very helpful in managing the dependencies and planning out which ones should go first before the others can proceed. But the limitations of it is that it's not ideal for large, complex projects. And when I say large, it's really relative based on the organization you're in, but it's usually about the amount of people involved, about the cost implications, and also in terms of impact to the organization. Complex is also relative, but it's actually related to the number of dependencies or the impacted interfaces, and um, also on the nature of the result of your project itself. So it could be that you're really unsure on what you want as an end product and you just want to go and experiment. So the traditional project management is not the framework for that. So the downside of this framework is that it's really difficult to make changes to the requirements that have been agreed on in the first phase. So as you saw earlier in the previous slide, the requirements are actually signed off very early on in the project, and there's really meticulous planning that goes into each and every dependencies and tasks, including the very small details. And that happens all at the start of the project. And then the testing only happens at the end of the development. And once you test and see that there are bugs, it's actually usually expensive to fix, especially if it wasn't really part of the planning in the early stages. So errors and bugs are usually risks to schedule delays and also cost implications. But most importantly, the customer only sees the finished product at the end of the project. And if the project really took a long time, like years, and there's a high risk that the customer has already changed their mind and on what they want, and that the product that you actually are delivering to the customers are no longer relevant. So yeah, those are the downsides of this framework. However, traditional project management is really suitable for industries like construction, where there is a set structure on what you need to do, because the companies like the construction in the industry of construction really plan down to the nuts and bolts of what they need to do in constructing a building or a house. And it used to be a very popular framework also in the IT software development industry in the olden days. But nowadays, there's really a shift for the companies to go agile. So, speaking of agile, one of the key differentiators of agile from the traditional one is that it's really customer centric and it's focused on the needs of the customers. So versus in the traditional sense where the customers are only involved at the start and at the end, in Agile, they are involved throughout the entire process. And the teams in an Agile project are self-organized and very well motivated. So the quality is also maintained throughout the development process, and the progress is actually incremental based. So you usually start with like a small minimum product, and then you just build on that with the customer as you go. And as I've mentioned, the visibility to the customers is really high for an agile project because they're really super involved in the process. So the downside of it is that it requires very quick decision making from strong product owners. And the project can easily go off track if without this strong leadership and guidance. And it also works best if you have dedicated project teams, meaning they're only working on that project alone. And it's also best for co-located teams, which doesn't make sense now in the work from home new normal in the COVID world. But we are actually finding out that agile teams can still perform in the work from home setting, and they're still very productive, even if we're not co-located. So my personal choice between the two is really agile, or more specifically Scrum. So I'm also lucky to be part of an organization that fosters the agile ways of working. So I'll be discussing a little bit more about Scrum. Okay, so Scrum is a framework to address complex problems while delivering products of the highest possible value. So it's not a process nor a technique for delivering products, but rather it is a framework for which you can employ various other processes and techniques. So it's also very lightweight, simple to understand, but really difficult to master. And this framework has a lot of certification exams as well, just like the traditional one. And I'm also lucky to have undergone training and certification on being a Scrum Master and a product owner. So I'll discuss what those mean exactly. Okay, so the entire framework, the Scrum framework, can actually be summarized by this picture right here. So I'll go through each one. Hopefully, I won't get super technical, but allow me to please pinpoint each of the components here. So starting off at the middle, which is of course the project team. So the project team comprises of a Scrum Master, a product owner, and a development team. So if you notice, there's no project manager role in the Scrum world, but the roles actually of the the project manager is split between these three roles in Scrum. So the Scrum Master is the servant leader who ensures that the rest of the team in the Scrum project adhere to the principles of the Scrum framework. And the most important role actually of the Scrum Master is to remove the obstacles that would impede the progress of the entire team. So the product owner, on the other hand, is the voice of the customer in the project team. So the product owner or the PO is the one that's in charge of the requirements and in prioritizing those requirements to make sure that the team is delivering value to the customers. And it's the product owner also that communicates to the stakeholders, which in the traditional sense is usually done by the project manager. And lastly is the development team. So they consist of everyone that needs to deliver a project. So not necessarily those that can code only are the those that can be called as development team, but it's really more cross-functional, and they need to be able to complete the product in the project. And they're also very self-organized. So a sprint, which is the one that's encircling the entire project team, is actually a period of time which specific tasks has to be completed. So it's a duration. It's not a specific event. Usually, a sprint lasts for 2 weeks. And within the sprint, there are sprint events or activities that has to happen um, in the duration of the 2 weeks or whatever duration your sprint is. So those are the four circles surrounding the middle circle. So starting off with the sprint planning. So sprint planning is usually the longest event in a sprint, but this is where the entire team actually, as the name connotes, goes and hashes out the entire product backlog. So as you see, there's a product backlog there that serves as an input to the sprint planning activity. And it's the product owner's role to actually ensure that the product backlog is complete, it's prioritized according to customer value. So the sprint planning is also the place for where the development team will negotiate with the product owner as to the acceptance criteria and the dependencies, and they list out all the tasks that they need to do. And this is also where they will estimate the complexity of each of the line items in your requirement of your list of requirements. So the way to do the estimation is actually by defining a united definition of done. So a definition of done usually just says that you need to agree on what criteria should connote that a requirement it can be moved to done. So this is usually different for different Scrum teams, and that's okay because Scrum is based on a project team agreement. So it's not really a defined requirement, but it is really something important for the entire team to agree on and should be followed and adhered to moving forward. So by agreeing to this, it helps the team come up with a unified estimate for each requirement. So to monitor the progress of the delivery of in the sprint uh, uh, event, it's actually the daily scrum. So which has to happen every day diligently, and it's actually a time boxed event. So it only has to happen for 15 minutes every day. So not longer than 15 minutes dapat. And the only thing that has to happen here in the daily scrum is that the entire dev team goes around the room and answers just three questions. What have you done and what are you planning to do? And if you have blockers or impediments in completing your task. So by discussing this every day, the entire dev team will always be on the same page as the tasks that they need to do in the sprint backlog will meet their sprint goal. So towards the end of the sprint is the sprint review, which is the other circle here on the picture. So this is where the dev team will present the entire sprint's product to the product owner. So this is where they will showcase their increment here to the PO and also to the stakeholders that's invited by the product owner. And this is where they give out feedback to the product. And this is where the PO will also get feedback from the stakeholders and then put that right to the product backlog later on. And then lastly is the sprint retrospective, which is actually my favorite event in Scrum because this is where the team comes together and really assesses what went wrong, what went right, what are the lessons learned, and what are their action items moving forward. Because this is really a place for which cultivates a culture of continuous improvement. So, and the items that are discussed in the sprint retro will form part of the product backlog also moving forward. And the cycle continues to for for the team to reach a minimum viable product, which where the product owner is satisfied with the outcome. So, okay, I think I've bored you enough with the technicalities. But given all of these, how do you now make things happen? Or if you guys will be asked to lead or implement something, then what are the things that you need to do in order for you to reach that? So, actually, one of my favorite projects in my entire professional life was planning our wedding. And this is a very biased opinion, but as a PM, I was able to actually apply all of the project management principles that I learned to ensure that we planned out the schedules and everything that we needed to do to make sure that the big day goes as smoothly as possible. So, yeah, I'll be referring a lot to this project later on, but let me start off with the first one, which is actually whenever you're asked to do something or to implement something, is to identify a sponsor. So, a project sponsor is the person in the organization which has the biggest stake in the project. And this sponsor will ensure that you are given all the resources that you need for you to be able to achieve your goal. And they will also be the person who will promote the project and champions it to the executives in the organization. And they usually come from the business side in an organization. So yeah. Next one is sorry. Okay, so once you've identified a project sponsor and you've asked them to promote and support your project, the next thing that you need to do is to create a project charter. So a project charter is just a one-pager document that actually summarizes the project as a whole at a very high level. So this is actually an authorization for you as a project manager to drive the project to completion. So parang it's a document that says, okay, here's your project, and now you're authorized to do all the things that you need to do for you to be able to complete this project. Okay, next up is to build your backlog. So once you have been authorized to um, to manage the project, next is to create a laundry list of the things that you need to do in the project. So as I mentioned earlier in the Scrum framework, this actually doesn't just include functional features if you're building a software, but it's also a list of the technical things, and even if you need like the administrative things that you need to complete in a project. And it's usually in a format of a user story. So in the olden times, like in the traditional sense, requirements are basically really, really long documents that are super technical in nature and usually hard to understand by the layman. But here in Agile or Scrum, user stories are actually encouraged so that anyone who reads the requirements would be able to understand it. And the format is usually this way. So as an end user, I want insert your requirement here so that, and then you mention your benefits. So probably to give you an example of how you would write it and to base it off of, for example, the wedding planning that we did, a sample user story would be, as a bride, I want to limit my guests to 120 people only so that I can manage my budget effectively. So by writing your stories that way, no matter if it's technical or functional, anyone in the team can actually understand it when they read it. And this is actually a very popular format that we use also in our organization. So next up is to decide on your minimum viable product, or MVP. So an MVP is a version of the product that's just enough to satisfy your customers' requirements. So this doesn't include like the bells and whistles of a product that you want, but as long as it works, then that's the viable product that you need. And it's actually defined by the product owner as well. So just like for example in the wedding that that we planned, our MVP was just, we needed to have a good food, good music, and good photo and video supplier. So we identified those as non-negotiables, and it really helped us in just managing our cost and also the stress in planning a wedding. And next is, once you have your non-negotiables, it's now to prioritize them. So you have to refine your backlog by ensuring that you list them according to the most value adding to the least. So if you've already identified your must-haves and your should-haves, then it would be best to prioritize them from top to bottom. So this is where you work with the project team to identify the specific tasks that you need to complete. And this is where you list down all the dependencies as well. So it's not expected that the project manager or the product owner will know everything or all the dependencies. So it's important to really involve the team in the process of refining your backlog. And once you're done, then you're ready to start your sprints. And this is where I would recommend to really follow the Scrum framework. So here's where you will agree on your Scrum events. You clearly define the roles and expectations, and you rally the team to self-organize and promote the Scrum principles. So this is usually in our organization just a meeting for you to set expectations and to align that moving forward, this is how you're supposed to do things and to schedule the all the Scrum events beforehand. And once you have that started, it's important for you as the leader of the project to always be aware. So to always be on top of everything, especially if the sprints are already ongoing. So awareness is key for every uh, for every project manager because a project can always change, and you also have to be aware of the external factors that could affect the project itself. So just like me and my professional career right now during COVID, I have projects that are no longer relevant in the new COVID world. So it was actually my decision to put a pause on some of the projects that I'm working on because it won't be relevant and it won't be helpful to the society right now while we're battling COVID. So, and once you're aware, you also have to adapt and decide. So you always have to be ready to always adjust because circumstances in a project may not always proceed as planned. So you can plan it to the smallest detail, but there are always circumstances that would derail your plans, and therefore you should always be ready to make quick but critical decisions. So just like in my example earlier. But on a personal example, so when we had our wedding, so we planned it to be a garden wedding, and it was gonna be in June, and so it was supposed to be open and the ceremony will just be on the grass. So we planned for when a scenario hits that it will rain. So we thought that okay, let's put up a plan B where we put up a tent so that even if it rains, then the guests won't get wet, or and that we can still proceed with the wedding on the garden. But come wedding day, it actually was at the tail end of a week where it was raining the entire week leading to that day. And so we thought, okay, we can still do the tent approach. But on the morning itself of the day, it was pouring, as in it was heavy rains in Tagaytay. So we then just decided to quickly, okay, let's just move everything indoors. So we have a ballroom in the venue that we have where we're supposed to have our reception. So we decided, okay, let's just do the ceremony where the reception is, and then after the ceremony, let's just arrange it for the reception. And it worked out really well. And actually, to our surprise, it felt like we actually planned everything to be indoors, where it was really supposedly a garden wedding. But yeah, that's really an example of making quick and critical decisions on your project. And actually, the most important one that I would say, and I cannot stress this enough, is to communicate, communicate, communicate. If you're a project manager, 90% of your time is actually spent communicating on the progress of your project, on the issues, problems, risks, assumptions to the stakeholders. And in the traditional sense, there's like an elaborate communication management plan that a project manager should create so that they know which type of communication they should use for a type of a stakeholder. So, but in the agile sense, it's just really important to always keep your lines open, always be transparent to anyone around you in the project team, the external stakeholders, your management team, and the people that works for you. So it's really a 360 type communication. And of course, in communication, you should always tailor it to the audience that you would inform to. So if you're communicating to executives, for example, then the information should be brief, succinct, and should not include all the nitty gritty details. But if you're talking to, let's say, your project team, then it's expected that you have to go through the details one by one and even get really technical. But in the agile Scrum framework, you noticed earlier that communication is really embedded, because in every Scrum events, there is always communication inside the team and outside the team. And just like on the daily Scrum that happens every day for 15 minutes. Last but definitely not the least for me is to persevere. So if you are a project manager and you are given the mission to create something or to make something happen, then all the 9 things that I mentioned at the top will not be relevant if you don't persevere as a person and as an employee. And you should always keep doing that until fade. So this reference actually my favorite reference, because also I'm a music lover. So um, this is just a way to really say that you should always keep doing doing this until you reach your goal. So not just the persevere actually, but the entire list that I just went through. So yeah, actually this is pretty much it. And probably as a homework for you guys is to create your project charter. So in during the first Liyab learning challenge, I think the homework there was to think of a project that you can do now during ECQ. So now is to create the project charter for that project. Or if you don't have a project in mind yet, just think of something that you would want to do, and then fill out this template right here. So I will be sharing also a sample later on when I upload this in the Facebook group. But the template is really very easy. So it's just the title of your project, and you just need to fill out the form. So for your target customers who are experiencing the pain points that you wish to address, the name of your project and the short description of it can help them address those pain points, because then you can explain it there. And it's unlike also other projects. So this is where you will discuss how it differentiates from the others, and what's your value proposition exactly. And then the most important part is to identify your project sponsor and who will authorize you for this project. So for this, you can just type siguro the name of who your project sponsor is. You don't really need to have it signed, but yeah, it's a good exercise to really to just think about the entirety of your project and how it can impact also your target customers. Okay, and that's pretty much it. I hope I was able to give you a brief, but also very specific tips on how to make things happen. And hopefully, it's your time, or when you are asked to do something or to implement something, you'll always remember the steps that I did. So this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, is not for those who are looking into certifying in the traditional one or in the Scrum one. So those are really very different frameworks, and they have their own actually training programs. So the traditional one, I went through actually like a week's worth of training, and it needed 4 years worth of experience for you to even qualify for the exam. But in the Agile framework, you just need to undergo 2 days training, and then you study sample exams, and then it's really just an 80 question multiple choice, and then once you pass that, then you're good and you're certified Scrum Master, Product Owner, and a whole lot more. So there are a lot of trainings actually out there, and they're also done virtually. I think right now in the COVID world. So, and if you're interested to know more, probably if you really want to get certified, then feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you out. Okay, and yeah, I'm ready to take any questions if there are.
All right. Thank you so much, Colleen. So I know you've been in the group for a while, so you've seen some of our previous sessions, and with the group, it kind of takes a while for us to collect the questions because of the natural lag between Facebook Live and us talking. So I'll give them some time to now type up their questions now if they haven't yet. Because I have a couple of questions actually for you.
Sure.
I am super curious, and I think some of the people in the group are also curious. Like, how did you discover your niche in making things happen? Because I noticed that your undergrad degree was in BS Math, and you worked
Yeah.
in a different bank before, but now you're a customer experience designer. How did you find your niche? What helped you discover that you love making things happen?
Yeah. So actually, when I look back in my career, I would really say that I'm also lucky to be given the breaks that I was given. I started in this bank as a management trainee, so I was able to go around the different departments in the bank and to see how they really work. And eventually, I ended up in IT, which wasn't a popular opinion during my time, but it was really exciting because I didn't have any idea as to how how to IT because my undergrad wasn't even computer science, and all I had was just the passion to learn because I was really interested in how they do things there. And one of the first big break that I had actually in the bank that I'm in now was my mentor in IT gave me the project to implement a new email system in the bank. So before I joined, they've been on an email system that was actually bound to break already, and it was decided to go and implement something from the cloud. So back then, cloud was a very new kind of concept, especially for banks, because usually cloud is means that you're putting your information up there in the cloud. But yeah, I was given that task to bring that project to completion, and I really didn't expect, and I really didn't know what to do. It was just really a matter of constant asking for guidance from the leaders in IT and making sure that I involve a project team that knows the landscape of the organization since I was pretty new. And yeah, and when I did that, I actually found like a sense of fulfillment, which is kind of weird. And it's something that I haven't felt in the previous organization or in the other departments that I've rotated in. And that's where I also found that, oh, this is something that's interesting and that I can possibly be good at. And interestingly enough, after that stint in implementing the new email system, a new department opened up in our organization, which was then called the Corporate Project Management Group. So it was like, oh, that's perfect because that's where I can do this full time and really just implement projects. And yeah, so one thing led to another. I eventually moved to that group, and that's where I found that it was so fulfilling for me to just keep on implementing things for the bank. I really enjoyed the fact that not one project is the same, and that it always challenges me and it forces me to really learn. And it doesn't really bore you because it's not a routine kind of approach, and that there's always new things to learn about it. And that's actually how I found out that okay, so it's really about the fulfillment I get when I get something done. And I also felt that not just in implementing projects, but it also things in life. So like in creating small projects, or like even in the project I mentioned on planning our wedding, it was such a fulfilling experience for me. So yeah, that's probably how I got to it. So super far from my undergrad, which is BS math, and honestly, I haven't. I cannot also apply the things that I learned there. But one of the things, probably in terms of principles, is the critical thinking. So in math, it really allows you, or really urges you to think logically and critically. So that's, I guess, one of the things that I brought into this new profession.
All right. Thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing your story. I think one thing that we can pick up from that, especially if you're thinking about whether this is a fit for you or not, I think just keep saying yes to opportunities to try something new, and then see how you feel about it. If
Yeah,
for example you don't like it, then it's okay, and then we can
yeah,
try something else. But then if you did like it, maybe there is a niche for you there, and to try to see and discover if that's somewhere you want your career to grow, like similar
yes,
to what happened to Colleen. So we do have
exactly.
a question here from Charlie. Charlie says thank you, and his question is regarding step 8 on how to make things happen. When is a strategic time on when to make a decision to adapt to a situation? In the case of your wedding, like how many hours did you decide to make the venue indoors?
Yeah, super good question. And this is actually part of the step seven, ba yun? That is be aware. So in the process of becoming aware, you also have to consider the things that you need to think about in terms of deciding or adapting to the situation. So it's really like doing a risk assessment. So where you need to decide on and assess within yourself or your project team on when would be the best time to take a decision or to pivot when needed. So in the case of our wedding, we already know because we asked our suppliers beforehand about the lead time that is needed for us to decide whether we're taking it indoors or we're going for the tent. And I think we were given 8 hours. So our wedding was 4 p.m. And then we were given until 10 a.m. to decide on when or where to do our ceremony. So I think at around 8 a.m. So the moment we actually woke up and saw that it was pouring, we immediately decided, okay, let's not risk the tent. Let's just move everything indoors. So we did that, I think, yeah, around 8 or 9 a.m. And then the ceremony was at 4. So there was enough time actually for the suppliers to bring everything indoors.
Thanks for that, Colleen. I think what I can take away from that is if, for example, on deciding on the strategic time is really consulting with your stakeholders or your suppliers, for example, like what Colleen did. At least she knows how much leeway she has before actually pivoting or going with a different decision. So in the context of projects, I think it's good, and I think this is a tendency that I've noticed with sort of like younger professionals who are scared to admit mistakes. Na they would wait until like it's like the very last minute to say that
Yeah.
oh, we have to change it because we couldn't make it happen. But knowing, like having an open conversation already with, for example, your project sponsor or the people in your team, with like how much time do we have until we decide on something else or we choose to go a different path. So I think one of Colleen's tips also was to communicate, communicate, communicate. And I think that's one way to determine like what is the strategic time on making a decision, is if you know, because of constant communication with the people you're working with, then you'd be able to find out, okay, when is the right time to actually say something, right?
Yep,
We have
exactly.
we have another question here from Ram, who is actually asking more about your your bank, right? So what project would you want the bank to pursue next in light of COVID?
Oh, that's very that's very specific to our bank, Ram. But yeah, I would say on a very high level that I'm really happy with the way our bank is addressing customer needs right now during COVID. And I think something that we've been really proud of is the fact that we're able to quickly get a feature to the public even while on ECQ, like the remittance on the app. So we've heard that during lockdown that there was really a need for our people to reach their loved ones, which are away from the traditional brick and mortar banks, and the financial institution that's near to them are remittance centers. So yeah, I'm really glad that that's something that we're really that we really were able to implement pretty quickly. But that in line with that, I would really want for the bank to continue on that path, whether when we listen to the public through social listening, we can actually get insights as to what are the needs of the society right now. So I'm also actually happy to be able to have a tool that can allow us to listen to the sentiments of the public, and that can actually form part of the things that we can do in the future. And I'm sure there's a lot already in the pipe. Of course, I cannot disclose them yet. But yeah, yeah, we're doing a lot for our customers now during ECQ.
All right. Thank you so much, Colleen. So far we have no other questions, but I do have a question that may be on some people's minds right now. Because we all know there is no actual course called project management, right?
Yeah.
There's no college degree for it.
Yes.
But my
Exactly.
question is, if someone, for example, some of the college students or the fresh graduates in the group want to pursue a career in project management, would you have any tips for them if that's something that they want to pursue?
Yeah, definitely. So, how I did it before was I found a mentor first. So, a mentor who's known to already manage projects in the past and is very experienced on it. And how I did it was to really ask questions and shadow that the mentor that I identified, and to really see how they work and how they engage with the project teams. So that was the first thing that I did. It was to really learn the ropes on the job. But for, of course, for fresh grads, it would always be difficult to find that first mentor. Uh, but a way to really supplement that is that there are a lot actually of material right now on the fundamentals of project management. Actually, if I just breeze through Coursera and the other e-learning sites, and there are a lot of crash courses there, or intro to project management, that I only actually just discovered also while I was studying for the certification exams. But yeah, the best way to do it is to for me personally is to learn it on the job and to observe how other people are doing it. So yeah, and also to self study. So when I did the self study, actually parang supplements the knowledge that I got observing other people, how they actually manage projects. And in the self-study then, you learn a lot about templates that you can use, tools that you can use, the different softwares that are available for managing projects. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. Since there are no further questions, I guess one last question from me would be, since you're a person who, for example, took the accreditation for being a project manager and being a scrum master and product owner, um, would you suggest that for someone who wants to get into uh, a project management career, that is something that they can possibly look into, or would you suggest other ways first before going into and getting a certificate, for example?
Okay, good question. Because they're actually very different in the two frameworks that I mentioned. So the first one, the traditional waterfall one, there's really no way for you to get certified first because the entry criteria for the exam is to build your experience. So I also found that really helpful because when I took the exam, I did not actually just think about what I studied on books or on paper. I actually took from my experiences on how I actually handled the situations. Because in the traditional sense, the exam is really situational. So it'll ask you when you're in this situation as a project manager, what are you supposed to do? So if you really didn't have experience there, that would be really difficult. So if you're keen on doing project management for waterfall, then I suggest to really get into an organization that will allow you to practice first and then gain and to learn as you go. On the other side of the fence, on the agile sense, it's more friendly for newcomers. So there are courses, trainings that you can attend, even if you have no experience in managing projects. So there are just 2 days actually. Just there's just a fee, which I think it will be wise if you get into an organization that will support the training also for that. And once you get into training, it usually comes with a certification exam already. So after 2 days, actually, you can already get certified once you pass the exams for the agile one. So yeah, that's the more friendly path to take for managing projects. But of course, it also entails like a whole different kind of experience. So when you're in an agile project team, it's very different, especially if you came from a traditional one also, or if you're going into it fresh, you would see that the agile ways of working is actually very it's more fun than the traditional one.
All right. Thank you so much, Colleen, for giving us more insight on those certifications as well. So if any of you have more questions for Colleen, she's part of the group and she's gonna be posting the homework in the group. So you will have her Facebook account there and you can possibly send her a message, right? If you're curious about any of these certifications that she talked about, or if you have questions that you didn't get to ask during this Facebook live session. But thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing your experience and then your stories with us. I learned a lot, especially when in my mindset, because like project management is mostly mainly used for more tech projects. I've done agile before, but the traditional one, parang I in my head I just thought there is no use for it, but now I'm realizing there are cases where the traditional method is the more apt method to use to manage a project. So thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon.
Thank you also for having me.
All right. And that concludes our day 8 for the Liyab Learning Challenge. Actually, tomorrow we'll change it up a bit. So I know we've talked about ideas and today execution, But tomorrow we'll take a break from that, and we'll learn something a bit more on the technical side, and I think would be fun for us to learn. It's actually the teacher for tomorrow. Colleen, can I share?
Yeah,
The
sure.
teacher
Go
for
ahead.
tomorrow is actually Colleen's brother, who is a data scientist. So that's very exciting. So I hope you guys tune in with us tomorrow at 5 p.m. for the Liyab Learning Challenge Day 9. And we'll see you tomorrow.